What's up guys, I'm Phoenix Master 1 and welcome to my builds guide and refined review for Tsubasa, Larcei, Spring Fir, Chad, and Heath. Tsubasa gets a weapon refined to her Mirage feather, which did give her +3 speed, and it also had the effective damage against armors and cavalry units. And now with this weapon refined, she's able to get +11 attack and speed in the combat, and also gets the half version of null follow-up, the offensive half, which allows her to bypass any kind of follow-up negation effects, which is something that she really needed because she does have dive bomb in her weapon, and previously she would have to run some kind of flow skill, but now this is built in her weapon. And then she also has the fixed Canto 2 built in this weapon refined, so she doesn't really have to run a trace skill either because this is fixed Canto 2. So even if she teleports, she's still going to be able to canto back 2 spaces, unlike the Neo Trace skills. And finally, in player phase, after an ally has acted, she's able to get +5 attack and speed in combat, and also the dive bomb effect, which she did have before, and now she can also get attack and speed debuff neutralization. So if you're going to be running her with Legendary Male Robin, then it is going to be a bit annoying, but if not, then attack and speed debuff neutralization does help her, and it also means that she doesn't really need to run attack speed clash, and can just run some other option like Flared Sparrow for example, and still not get affected by any kind of debuff to her offenses. So overall this weapon refine is good. It is going to be helping her in the melee nuking and functioning in the player phase, but unfortunately it doesn't really have any kind of true damage or any kind of damage reduction piercing, so that is one of the things which stops a lot of nukes, and you can always support her with Legendary Leer, and that is true for any kind of nuke in the game, but having it in the weapon would have been pretty nice. But with this weapon, she's able to get a lot more offenses, basically +16 attack and speed in the combat, and also is able to get half null follow-up and canto, so can be helpful in the hit and run basically, and that's going to be her playstyle. Unfortunately, a lot of people that did build her up before this weapon refine are going to be needing to change their build because this weapon refine just clashes with a lot of the things that Tsubasa got before this refine in like hollow forms, or if you fought it off skills like flow and trace for example. So even though this is not the most insane weapon refine, at the very least it does give the things what Tsubasa needed and frees up her slot B skill and also slot A skill for some new premium options, and I hope in the future we get even more options for these melee flyers so that Tsubasa can run those along with this weapon refine. So even if you're going to be using her on a budget, this weapon refine is still going to be helping you because of its effective damage on cavalry units and armor units, and even on like super budget with like Blade Session and Hit and Run, you're still going to be able to put down many of the cavalry threats and armor threats in limited battles and in resonant battles and arena assault. So you can just run Blade Session and also Hit and Run as the slot B skill. So she does have Canto 2 in her weapon, and Hit and Run is basically going to be helping you retreat even better, so it's a pretty nice cheap skill that you can run on her, and Moonbow can be the special that you can run. Dull Close is also another slot B skill that you can run, and also Wings of Mercy 3, so all of these are going to be the budget options that you can run on Tsubasa. And if you're someone like me who did get her in the hollow forms, then you were probably debating over the Flow 4 skill or the Neo Trace skill, which doesn't matter now because she gets both in her weapon refine. So if you're just trying to modify your form of Tsubasa who probably had Ruptured Sky, some attack and speed stacking skill like Clash or Catch, and then Rain or attack speed Oath 4 skill, then you can easily run Hit and Run as the cheap option. And I really like this with the Canto 2 built in her weapon, so it can still get the job done if you're not trying to spend any kind of premium skill. But if you're trying to really optimize your Tsubasa with this weapon refine, then I would definitely say that running Flared Sparrow and Gambit is going to be the way to go about things, because Flared Sparrow is going to be giving you that flame terrain effect, the damage before your first hit, and she doesn't really need the Clash skill because she already has the attack and speed debuff neutralization built in her weapon. And because she doesn't have any kind of minus and special cooldown in her weapon, she can easily run Gambit 4 with Aether to get 15 true damage per hit. And she can also get 50% damage reduction, which ideally she should not be needing, and she should be killing things in the player phase. But in case you need to tank something in the enemy phase, then Gambit 4's damage reduction can be helpful. And Speed Defense Rain Snap is something that I really like her on her, and it's a lot better than, you know, running a rain skill. It's an upgrade, giving her the extra movement. But I guess if you're running her with Legendary Hinoka, then you can also run Soaring Guidance as the slot C skill. Speed Defense Rain Snap is going to be giving you that extra movement, which does help with the hit and run playstyle of Tsubasa. And you can also run Guidance 4 in her slot C. And mainly we're going to be focusing on our player phase with Flared Sparrow and Gambit 4. Aether is going to be the special that you can run. You can even run Miracle, but I do like Aether a bit more. And Gale Force doesn't really work with Gambit Force, so that's why Aether or Miracle are going to be your two options. And then you can also run her with Wings of Mercy 4, which is a new skill that we have got, and Attack Speed Oath 4 is also something that you can run her with, but not going to be the best skill most of the time, but it can work out with a build like this just so that you can always have the teleportation. So Flared Sparrow with Wings of Mercy 4 is something that you can also run, and Wings of Mercy 4 is one of those skills which has absolutely no overlap with her weapon, and she's not going to be wasting any kind of effects of it. So it is going to be a pretty good option for you to run in her slot bay if you don't really want to get the true damage out of Gambit. Personally, I really like Gambit 4 because as a melee nuke, at least getting some kind of true damage is going to be helping her, and Gambit 4 definitely provides her with some nice juicy true damage, which isn't really present in her weapon. So I like it a lot more, but Wings of Mercy 4 is also going to be an option. And finally, because she does have Canto 2 built in her weapon, and because she's a flying unit, you can also try and use her in Arena if you're a big fan of her. Unfortunately, she's not going to be scoring as much as many of the free-to-play Lance Flyers that we have nowadays, but still, Guidance for support and Gambit is something that you can run with B-Dual Flying 4 if you really want to make use of her in Arena. Larcei gets a decent weapon refine, and with this weapon she did get -1 special cooldown and also the dull all effect, so it allowed her to pretty much ignore any kind of visible buffs of the enemies, which is still really useful even to this day with her weapon refine. And now with this refine, she's able to get +8 to all of her stats, and also the null guard effect or the half tempo effect, so she's not going to be getting stopped by any kind of guard skills of the enemy. And she also gets Time Pulse 4 built in this weapon, which can free up her Slotsy skill, and she can easily loop Vital Astra with Time Pulse 4, so it is kind of reminiscent of Ascended Fir in that aspect. And then finally, she's able to get true damage based on 15% of her speed. So overall, this is not the most insane weapon refine, and she's obviously going to be facing competition from the newer God Swords that we have got, who can stack up a lot of speed. And we also have seen some weapon refines like Marita's weapon refine, which I honestly prefer a bit more because of its damage reduction piercing. Larcei can still run Vital Astra and loop it with this Time Pulse 4 built in her weapon, and can just run some other Slotsy skill. You can only loop Godlike Reflexes with double Time Pulse 4 because it's a defensive special and you can only pre-charge it. After the combat, you're not going to be at your maximum special cooldown count, but still she can make good use out of Godlike Reflexes and also Gale Force because of having the Null Guard in her weapon refine. And if you're someone who got her in the Holoforms, then you probably got her with Time Pulse 4, which is redundant with Vital Astra. Thankfully, still, Attack Speed Finish 4 is going to be amazing on her because she's going to be spamming Vital Astra with her weapon, so the extra damage and the healing is helpful. And Close Call 4 is amazing skill because you can get the damage reduction and also the Phantom Speed, which is so good for any kind of speed stacking unit. So if you got a Holoforms Larcei like me, then you can try and replace her Slotsy skill with something else like Attack Speed Oath 4, which you can get from the Divine Codes, and also Speed Smoke 4. So those are going to be your two main options if you want to replace the Time Pulse 4 that you got in the Holoforms that she just had a few months back in the revival. The Null Guard effect or the half tempo effect built in her weapon refine is going to be helping her trigger Vital Astra twice in the player phase in a single round of combat, so that can be pretty helpful for doing a lot of damage. And then if you really want to make use of the Time Pulse 4 that you got in the Holoforms, then you can run her as a Gale Force unit. So with her weapon, Gale Force is a 4 cooldown special, and the Time Pulse 4 in her weapon and her Slotsy skill do stack up, so she can just have 2 cooldown Gale Force, which can be easily triggered with like Flashing Blade or any kind of special charges effect. But if you can give her -1 special cooldown support from some kind of other unit like Asker, Garrick, or really any kind of infantry pulse unit, then you can easily have a 1 cooldown Gale Force, which you can immediately trigger because of the Null Guard present in her weapon. So this weapon refine does improve her Gale Forcing potential, so that's something you can do with her weapon refine if you want to play to her strengths. And you will have to outsource Null Follow-Up if you don't really want to run it in her Sacred Seal slot, because she doesn't really have that in her weapon. So Gale Force Larcei is something that you can make use of even at low merges. And then if you're trying to really pierce through the damage reduction with Larcei, then Physical Null Follow-Up is going to be the option. And Vital Astra and Speed Smoke 4 are going to be your main ways of getting the damage reduction. Now unfortunately, even though she can pierce through the damage reduction and cut it in half with Physical Null Follow-Up, she's still going to be missing out on a tier 4 damage reduction skill which is really important for a God Sword so that they can get extra damage reduction and also the phantom speed, which is really important in this speed creep metagame, especially for an older unit. So you're going to be trading that off, but if you really want to pierce through the damage reduction, then physical null follow-up is something that you can run. And since she doesn't really have null follow-up in her weapon, she also appreciates having this and you wouldn't really have to outsource it. You can also run her with a distant counter skill so that she can tank the range units with her damage reduction, with Vital Astra, the tier 4 damage reduction skill, and also Speed Smoke 4. And distant attack speed solo does give her even more speed, which is something that she can really appreciate. And if you're going to be tanking with her in Aether Raids offense, then I really suggest having Godlike Reflexes, Attack Speed Prime, and also the Attack Speed Pledge skill. Now, it might seem a bit weird seeing Godlike Reflexes this late into the builds, and the reason being is that Time Pulse 4 has a really weird interaction with Godlike Reflexes because it's a defensive special. So whenever it triggers, you're going to be retaliating back with your unit, and your cooldown is not going to be at its maximum cooldown. So Time Pulse 4 doesn't really loop Godlike Reflexes. So that's why Time Pulse 4 is mainly going to be useful for pre-charging it for something like Aether Raids offense, and you can easily do that with Asker support. And you can also run Attack Speed Prime, which can give you more offenses, and also the distant counter effect if you just stack up enough visible status effects on her, which is not hard to do with Attack Speed Pledge, with Asker, Peony, and those kinds of units. So you can definitely try and loop Godlike Reflexes with the Special Charges effect, which also helps with her Prime skill. And because she has got the Null Guard in her weapon, she's going to be able to easily loop Godlike Reflexes, and it is going to be helping her against a lot of the damage reduction piercing that is out there with Lethality, Deadeye, and stuff like that, and get even more damage with Spurn 4 that we have now. You will certainly need to provide her with the external support, but in the light season it is pretty easy to trigger the Prime skill with the external null follow-up with Resonance, Blades, and Shields, the debuff neutralization, and also the orders effect that you can get out of Peony and Asker. So you pretty much want to do what you can do with any kind of other God Sword, which is just stack up a lot of attack and speed, and especially speed, so that you can get that damage reduction. She can also run some other builds like Special Spiral 4 with Ether looping, but unfortunately she's not going to be able to get too much damage reduction or speed out of it. So those are going to be the options, but ultimately speed stacking is what is going to be helping a God Sword. Springfur, in my opinion, won this Weapon Refine badge by getting a really good Weapon Refine. So Bunbin Baton did give her minus and special cooldown, and it already had the armor effective damage and the full null follow-up built in. And now with this Weapon Refine, she's able to get +8 to all of her stats in the combat, and also get the Null Guard effect or the offensive tempo effect. So she can nuke a bit better now because she is not going to be caring about the guard skills of many of the tanks. And with her Weapon Refine, she also gets the Phantom Speed +7, which we have seen on the tier 4 damage reduction skills. So this definitely goes really well with the damage reduction that she has got in her weapon. She can also have the foe's damage reduction effect by 50%. So this is reminiscent of physical null follow-up, which ironically Ascended Fir brought into Fae. And finally, she's able to get up to 40% damage reduction based on her speed, and that's why Phantom Speed built in her Weapon Refine does help her just scale off better damage reduction. And if you run Speed Smoke 4, then it is going to be helping you even more. So overall, this Weapon Refine is absolutely amazing for melee nuking and even for functioning as a mixed phase flyer. So not only she can nuke really well in the player phase with her damage reduction halving and also the tempo effect, but also survive units with her damage reduction. And the flyers have got amazing skills with Gambit and Guard Bearing 4, so you can always stack up those skills for even more damage reduction. And a flyer having physical null follow-up and essentially having a tier 4 damage reduction skill is really good, along with having armor effective and half tempo effect. And before you decide to build her up with premium skills, I just want to give a heads up that unlike Tsubasa and Larcei, Springfur has not got a revival for her holoforms. So she still has a chance if her holoforms batch wins in the revival poll. So if you want to deck her out with the premium skills, then in the future, Springfur could appear in holoforms again. So I really felt like giving that heads up before going into her builds because she can make use of a lot of premium skills. But if you're going to be using her on a budget, then Windsweep can still work out with her base kit. And Moonbow is a special that you can run, and you can essentially trigger that on your double attack. And Blade Session Sacred Seal is going to be going well with this kind of player phase build. So even though she has got the damage reduction and everything, Windsweep is going to be a pretty decent budget option that she can still run. Otherwise, you can also run Hit and Run or Dull Close Inner Slot B as the budget options. And if you got her in the Holo forms last year, then you probably got a build like this with Attack Speed Catch, Ruptured Sky, Neo Trace, and a Rain skill. And that can still work out with this build because she is a much better mixed phase flyer now because of Bun Bun Baton. And she doesn't really have Kanto in her weapon, so Neo Trace can still work out. And you can just stack up the offenses with these skills. And this is a build that you can even get the skills for from the Divine Codes and limited ephemera manuals because we recently had Jill, and Attack Speed Catch 4 is plenty available in Divine Codes 4. So if you don't really want to give her too many premium skills, then this could still work out. But obviously she has a lot more premium options now and also a lot of specialized ones, which I'll go over. And she can also run Gale Force in Aether Raids offense, just like Larcei because of the Null Guard in her weapon. And she can actually be a really good asset for a Gale Force team because she has got the damage reduction halving and also the armor effective damage, which can be helpful to just take care of the near save armor units on many of the teams. So you can run her with Wings of Mercy and Gale Force, and with her weapon Gale Force is a 4 cooldown special, which you can then pulse down with Quicken Pulse and bring it down to 3 cooldown. And you can just run her with Asker or Garrick or any kind of other unit that can give the pulse support. Obviously it is going to be a bit harder than an infantry unit like Larcei to pulse her down, but if you can give her the special cooldown support, then she can have Gale Force at 2 cooldown, which she can trigger with 2 hits, and that is going to be going well with the Gale Force team. And Heavy Blade is definitely not something I would recommend on a unit like her who doesn't really have the highest attack, and in general, like meeting Heavy Blade checks nowadays is a really big pain. So if you can give her the special charges from something like Na, then that can also work out. But if not, then Garrick or Asker can work in either of the seasons. If you want to give her some more of the recent premium skills, then Attack Speed Clash 4 and Speed Defense Rain Snap are going to be the options. This way she's going to be having more movement and she can just neutralize her attack and speed debuffs, which is really good offensively. And again, for the slot Bs, a Neo Trace skill can work out because she doesn't really have Kanto in her weapon. So this is also a build option that you can do. And if you want to go full player phase route, then Flared Sparrow and Aerial Maneuvers are the options that we can run now. So Flared Sparrow is amazing on any kind of player phase, a Cavalier or Flyer, and Aerial Maneuvers is something that we've recently got on Legendary Elincia. So this is going to be providing her with the better movement, and you can also run Guidance 4 or Soaring Guidance to provide support to your teammates. If you want to go more of a mixed phase route and actually want to tank things with her, then you can certainly run Guard Bearing 4 so that you can stack up the damage reduction with her Bun Bun Baton. And this is something that can be useful in Summoner Duels as a frontliner. And she can essentially use the drawback skill and tank units with Guard Bearing 4 and her damage reduction. And also retaliate back with Ruptured Skies and provide the Guidance 4 support. But unfortunately, because she's an Axe Flyer, it is going to be a bit hard for her against T-Tam Iras and Brave Selifs. But still, this is an option that is possible on Spring Fir now. Finally, at max investment, if you're trying to take a page out of Halloween Anna's book, then this is definitely something you can run with Attack Speed Prime 4 and Speed Smoke 4 giving her the dodge status. And because she does have -1 special cooldown in her weapon, Guard Bearing 4 is a bit better than Gambit 4 for the extra damage reduction. So you can definitely run that on a God Axe Fir build because she does have the null follow-up and the damage reduction halving and null follow-up in her weapon, so it can certainly work out at this kind of insane investment. Chad gets a decent weapon refine for a free-to-play demote unit with his Wildcat Dagger, so it does provide him with +8 to all of his stats in the combat, and it also has the Omni Foes buff stealer effect that we have seen before on Arcane Nihility and also on Freya, who did introduce this kind of effect in FE. So this effect is going to be helpful against the foes that are going to be having the visible buffs on them. And visible buffs are definitely pretty common, so this effect can get the usage. But I kind of wish that he had the foe penalty doubler effect because he already debuffs the opponent's defense and resistance with his Dagger 7 effect. So I would have liked that a bit more, but still this buff stealer effect can be helpful in certain situations. And then he has got the Null Guard effect or the half tempo effect. Like 3 units on this batch have got the Null Guard effect, so Chad can definitely make good use out of this half tempo effect so that he can trigger lethalities a lot easily. And then he has got 30% damage reduction on foes first attack, and finally he gets true damage based on 10% of his speed, which is a bit low, For the modern standards, I wish he had got more true damage because his base attack is not the highest. And overall, this weapon refine is going to be helping him trigger lethalities a lot easily because of the null guard effect. And he's also going to be a lot more bulky because of the buff stealing effect that he has got and the damage reduction. So he does have pretty high HP for a dagger unit, and that can definitely come into play at max investment. But overall, his weapon refine is not really something that you'll go out of your way to build for. And this is just going to be a pretty nice upgrade for the fans that have built him up over the years. And until we get an arcane dagger, this is definitely going to be his best option. And even when we get an arcane dagger, I hope that at least this weapon refine stays as a decent side grade option. So if you're going to be building up Chad with the help of divine codes, then this is a build that you can run. So you can easily run Moonbow so that he can trigger that on his double, and also run attack speed ideal and Oath 4 from the divine codes, and null follow-up is available on Lumera. So that is something you can take advantage of, and I do like having the plus speed IV on him because he really needs to double the enemies to trigger his special. And then if you're going to be spending a Floret, then the attack IV is obviously going to be helpful. And the real Chad builds definitely come after this, especially in the form of this optimal build. Now, he is going to be stacking up a lot of damage reduction with Remote Sparrow, his weapon, and also Brash Assault 4. And keep in mind that Brash Assault 4 is going to be giving you that damage reflection. So on his double, he's going to be able to do a lot of damage, not only with the damage reflection, but by also triggering lethality with the use of attack speed pledge that he can run in the slot C. So that can give him the special charges effect, and that goes really well with the null guard effect present in his weapon refine. So even though this Chad build is extremely expensive, it is going to be the optimal build that you can run on him. And if you don't really have attack speed pledge, then you can just outsource it with Na, or you can even run Brave Male Robin. And Brave Male Robin is going to be able to provide amazing support with Rally Spectrum and give him the -2 special cooldown, and then he can trigger lethality on his double. So that is also a way of doing things, and this is going to be the way to use Chad essentially after this weapon refine, by stacking up the damage reduction, making him really bulky to survive the enemy's hit, and then just nuking them with lethality and the damage reflection. And because he doesn't really have null follow-up built in his weapon, Brash Assault 4's guaranteed follow-up attack can actually be pretty helpful to him as a pseudo half null follow-up, and obviously can easily outsource the null follow-up effect on him because he's an infantry unit. And then if you don't really want to run lethality with him, and if you just want to run physical null follow-up for the damage reduction piercing, then Ruptured Sky could be an option that he can run. And because he's got the null guard effect, triggering specials is going to be a lot easier, so finish kill can provide you with the true damage and also the healing. Chad, because of being an older unit, definitely requires a lot of investment with merges, dragon flowers, and even these premium skills, which do ultimately make him perform a lot better. And finally, if you want to run Flash Sparrow on his slot age to trigger lethality with the null guard effect, then you can certainly try and do that, with Time Pulse 4 bringing down lethality to 3 cooldown, and physical null follow-up is going to be overlapping a bit with lethality for the damage reduction piercing. But on the first hit, physical null follow-up is going to be a lot more helpful, and then on the second hit, lethality is going to be completely piercing through any kind of damage reduction. So it is an option that you can run despite the overlap, and Chad can still appreciate the physical null follow-up's damage reduction piercing on the very first hit because he doesn't really have the highest attack stat, and it can be helpful against many of the matchups. The final unit of this batch is going to be Heath getting a weapon refine. So Hyperion Lance builds off the Rider's Bane that he had before, and it carries over the effective damage on cavalry units, so it can help against many of the annoying cavalry units that we have now, and it can also give him +8 to all of his stats, and then he can debuff the foe's attack, speed, and defense based on 10% of his visible defense stat. And most of the time this is going to be a -4 or -5 debuff, so it is not the greatest compared to a lot of the modern units, but still it is going to be helping him. And then he can also have the guard effect on the foe, which does help him tank a lot of the threats, and also he gets the guaranteed follow-up attack because he's not the fastest unit. And then finally he essentially gets guard bearing 3.5 because it is worse than guard bearing 4, but it's better than guard bearing 3. So in the first combat of each phase, he's going to be having 40% damage reduction, and after that he's going to be having 20% damage reduction. So it can stack up with Gambit and Guard Bearing 4 to provide him with even more damage reduction. But overall, this weapon refine is not really too insane for a very competitive class type that are the Lance Flyers. and especially free-to-play Lance Flyers, which we have got a lot of now with Arian, Summermail Ches, and Travant getting a weapon refine. Even Cormac, who got the weapon refine this year, had true damage reduction in his weapon refine, which I really like a lot more than having this kind of guard-bearing damage reduction built in the refine. And Travant also had the IO shield effect in his weapon, and also the special charges, which goes really well with Gambit. So Heath's weapon refine is not really going to be too insane, but if you have built him up, then this is going to be an upgrade for sure, and you wouldn't really have to give him any kind of arcane weapon at the very least. So it can work out with the stats that he has got, but it is certainly not a weapon refine that is going to be incentivizing people to build up Heath and invest in him really heavily. So if you're going to be building him up the standard way, any kind of Wyvern Flyer is built up, who doesn't really have a lot of speed, then you can just stack up a lot of attack and defense with attack defense catch 4, attack defense Neotrace, and attack defense Rain. So this is something that you can run for the mixed phase. Obviously you can run a lot more premium skills, but if you don't really have them, then this could be the option that you can at least run. And easily Gambit 4 is going to be his slot B skill of choice, because he doesn't really have any kind of minus and special cooldown in his weapon. So he can use this to get 50% damage reduction and stack it up with the damage reduction of his weapon, and also get true damage in the process. And you can just run Miracle or Aether as your 5 cooldown special. Attack and defense clash can also work out to give him the extra offenses and also the bulk. And Guidance 4 or Soaring Guidance are going to be the options that you should be running to provide the support to your allies, because Heath is going to be mostly frontlining with his bulk and this kind of weapon with the damage reduction. And because his weapon works off the visible defense for debuffing the enemies, it is something that you can ascend and also use the Squad A Secret Seal to just increase your visible defense. But I really wouldn't say that you should go all the way through with something like Solid Ground, because he doesn't really debuff too much even if you stack up a lot of defense, because it's only 10%. So having the other skills like Attack Defense Clash or Attack Defense Catch are going to be better, so that he doesn't really reduce his resistance and still gets the attack and defense in the combat. And you can also run Guard Bearing 4 on him to stack up the damage reduction if you don't really want to run Aether and Gambit. So Bonfire could be a special that you can run. And with the support that we have gotten nowadays with stuff like Rally Spectrum, it is a special that can work out. And Guard Bearing 4 can stack up damage reduction, but you're not going to be getting the true damage which you get from Gambit 4. Finally, you can also use him with Distance Stance, because he does have a lot more resistance than many of the Wyvern Flyers that we have gotten. So he can certainly take on many of the mages, especially with the damage reduction. And even though Guidance 4 and Soaring Guidance are really good for slot C, if you just want to have something that can boost up his defense, debuff the enemy, and also give him the follow-up negation for an Omnibreaker effect with his weapon, then Attack Smoke 4 can work out. But unfortunately, because of so many units having null follow-up, almost always this is not really going to be mattering too much. Still, it's an option. And then you can also use him in Summoner Duels, like any kind of other Lance Flyer, for providing the frontliner support, and running Gambit 4 for the damage reduction, and also providing the teleportation support with Guidance 4 or Soaring Guidance. Attack Defense Unity is something that you can also run, and you can also stack it up with Grand Strategy of Legendary Male Robin, because Defense Res Ploy 3 is not the greatest in Summoner Duels, so it could be helpful to just stack up defense on him. And because of the cavalry effective damage on him, it can be helpful on many of the maps where cavalry units can just run wild. So overall, this was a decent refined batch, and next month we're going to be getting refines for Plumeria and Legendary Dimitri, and also their remix. Flame Emperor is also going to be getting a refine, so you can look forward to that. And if your friends are trying to build up any of these units, then you can definitely share this video with them. And if you did enjoy, then make sure to leave a like and a comment, helps you tremendously. And if you really enjoyed, you could always support me directly by using super thanks down below, or by becoming a YouTube member. And for more FE videos, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because I wish YouTube sub boxes showed my videos as often as we get God Swords and Lance Flyers in FE. So with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.